Well, as always, thank you for having me. I love being able to share my knowledge of wellness and prevention and exercise, something I'm very passionate about. As Sadie mentioned, my name's Laura Jones. I am a registered nurse. I do have a national certification in education and also professional development. This presentation is based off of the latest research and my own experience with running a marathon. All right, here's my disclaimer saying that this is for educational purposes and does not replace being seen by a physician or a sports professional, and I have no conflict of interest. All right, we're going to talk today about briefly about the history and some basic elements around marathons. We're going to go over some important factors that may impact your marathon performance. We'll talk about race day specifically, and then review some tips and resources at the end. All right, first we have marathon basics. Since a marathon is considered the ultimate running test, it's important to make sure that your body is up for the challenge. It is best to only start training for a marathon if you already have been running for a period of time. Most training programs that are out there expect you to be able to run actually a minimum of about 3 miles the very first week. So having a base activity level is really important. We'll talk more about this later. There are benefits that can be derived from running no matter your age. Many first-time marathoners actually start in their 50s and 60s. The oldest marathoner to date is Faju Singh, and this picture is a snapshot of a children's book that was written about him. He actually started running when he was 89, finished his first marathon at age 90, and continued to run marathons biannually until the age of 100. So with that being said, despite the age, if you have a history of lung or heart problems, I actually recommend seeing your doctor before you start training. In regards to lung problems, the research has shown that running a full marathon reduces your lung function and creates respiratory muscle fatigue. Now, for most average people, that isn't a problem, but based if you've had lung issues, it needs to be determined whether a marathon would impact your health. Many people with lung problems can and have successfully run marathons, but the conversation really needs to be had because the problems are very based on your unique medical history. In addition, if you have a history of heart disease or heart trouble, I recommend seeing a physician as well prior to starting your training. The research shows that completing a marathon actually reduces your blood pressure, is great for your heart and your vascular system. In fact, a study done about 2 years ago indicated that the benefit on your heart is so significant when you run a marathon that it equates to around a 4-year reduction in your heart and vascular age. But even like the lung issues, even though the benefits are significant, if you do have a history of any kind of heart problem, check with your physician before starting so that your own individual risk can be discussed. I thought I'd just share a little bit about how marathons came to be. In 490 BC, a Greek army defeated an invading Persian force near the city of Marathon and drove them out of Greece. After the battle, a courier named Philippes was ordered to run to Athens to report the victory. The distance between Marathon and Athens was 25 miles, and after he arrived, was reported that he immediately dropped dead. The story and the distance inspired the quote-unquote marathon to be included in the very first Olympics that were held in 1896 in Athens, Greece. At that time, the athletes ran the very same route that Philidipes did thousands of centuries later. Marathons and the 25 distance continued with the Olympics every 4 years until 1908. The Olympic Games at that time, that year, was being held in London, England. And the Queen at the time, Queen Alexandra, wanted the marathon to begin at Windsor Castle so that the littlest royals could watch the event and end at the Royal Box at the Olympic Stadium, a distance that happened to be 26.2 miles. So with that, the mileage ended up sticking. And in 1921, the length for a marathon was formally standardized at 26.2 miles. In 1976, about 25,000 runners competed and finished in a marathon, but the latest numbers are 2019 numbers, where 1.3 million runners competed in races annually. So just kind of an interesting history. It is a myth that only skinny or athletic people can complete a marathon. All sorts of people of all shapes and sizes strive for doing the difficult but not impossible. This picture shows a friend of mine who was running the Salt Lake City Marathon a few years ago. And really, if you have the desire to experience this for yourself, you can, and really only need the will to do it and the ability to train. There's lots of reasons why you may want to run a marathon, including challenging yourself or training for a longer event. Family and friends can end up being very persuasive and getting you to join them, which is how I signed up for my first marathon. Finally, other reasons may be a desire to lose weight or get healthier. Less than 1% of people in the US actually have run a marathon, so you're definitely amongst the select few. Marathon distances include a half marathon, which is 13.1 miles, a full marathon, which is the 26.2 miles, and there's actually ultra marathons now, which is really defined as anything that's longer than a marathon. Ultra marathon distances can be 50 miles, 62 miles, or 100 miles. So, but since this is a beginner presentation, we're really going to be focusing on half and full marathons. It is important before signing up for an event to find a training program so you know the length of time that you'll need to train for your selected distance. We'll definitely talk about this more later. As I mentioned earlier, it's always recommended that those who are aspiring to run a marathon build a base mileage before embarking on a training program, as most training programs have an expectation that you are already running. So all the evidence kind of supports not building up mileage too soon. The key is about 10% per week. The research shows that there's right about 18 to 20% is where they start seeing a lot of injury. So the gold standard is no more than 10%, or you really set yourself up for injury. I recommend starting with 4 to 12 weeks of a base training, getting used to running before you actually start the marathon training. And that's based off of your activity level. So if you are already a runner and you're running, a couple miles a day, then really, 3 or 4 weeks is going to cut it. But if you can't run more than a mile, then you may be more on the 10 to 12 weeks of that base training. Really, that base training gives your lungs and your legs a solid foundation. The goal would be being able to run 3 to 4 times a week before you start your training. You can consider doing what is called the run, walk, run method. This was actually developed by a gentleman named Jeff Galloway, who was a former Olympian and competitive runner. And what this method is you alternate running with walking. It's less grueling. It helps reduce your risk of injury. And if you're not an avid runner, will really help build up your mileage. So this is kind of the method that I used because I wasn't an avid runner when I started running. So I would run for a half a mile, and then I'd walk for a third of a mile, and then I'd run for a half a mile, and then I'd walk for a third of a mile. And then slowly I would increase that to where I was running for a mile, and I would only walk for a tenth of a mile and then run for another mile. So you can kind of see how you can kind of slowly increase that. It's just really less grueling. If you're working on your base training and you're not an avid runner and you kind of feel lost, there is a 9-week program. You can look it up on the internet called Couch to 5K that will help you kind of get started. Here's some information in regards to how much time it takes to train. Training's really for a long race is not something you can do quickly. It takes time. There's no shortcut for putting in those miles or those weeks of training. And like I mentioned, going too quickly will almost always lead to injury. So make sure you target a race well in advance of when you want to run it, because again, you have to have that base, and then you have to have the training program on top of it. If you're not already active, I definitely would encourage you participating in a 5K or 10K prior to doing a half marathon or a full marathon. But these are the specific amounts of time that you can expect. So for like a half marathon, expect 10 weeks of training. You should be able to run 2 to 4 miles before starting your training. And during your training, you're going to have to commit about 2 to 5 hours a week. The very first week, you'll run 8 miles, over the, 4 different runs, but 8 miles total the first week. And at the very peak, you'll be expecting to commit 5 hours a week, and the distance will be 20 miles. A full marathon really is about double that. Though not specifically for the weeks of training. Typically, it's about 18 weeks of training. You should be able to run about 3 to 5 miles prior to starting training, and you'll need to commit 4 hours to 10 hours at the peak. And it kind of tells you 15 to 40 miles is kind of what you're going to be training at. Training for a marathon really involves a lot of wear and tear on your body, and it's really important to not cut back on sleep to train. So this is not getting up at 4 a.m. to go for a run and only getting 5 or 6 hours of sleep at night. Really never underestimate the importance of sleep. It's just as important as your workouts, because really when you sleep, your body mends itself. That's when it grows stronger. If sleep is shortened, it takes longer to recover your muscles. It reduces your energy stores. It increases your risk for injury, and it actually decreases your immune response. So you open yourself up for illness as well. Also, the other thing with sleep deprivation is it affects you mentally. So you risk having mental burnout. And one of the things with endurance sports is that mental is really important, because your mind plays tricks on you and talks to you about, why are you doing this? Don't do this. Why you can stop. You don't need to do this. And so having that mental capacity to push that out is really important. And if you're sleep deprived, you may not be able to do that. You also need to commit to hydration. Dehydration is actually the single largest contributor to fatigue. And when you're training or racing, it also can be responsible for muscle cramping and stomach pain. To give an idea of how much water and electrolytes are lost during a marathon, a recent study done in 2021 determined that marathon runners lose about 1.25 teaspoons of salt, which equates to basically the entire daily amount recommended by the American Heart Association, so a whole daily amount during their marathon. And the average fluid loss for marathon runners are just a little over 2 liters, which is, if you think about a 2-liter soda bottle, that's the amount. And that study was done with the marathoners hydrating themselves throughout the marathon. So this is above and beyond their normal hydration. So it definitely is an issue. So you absolutely need to have a hydration plan. It's really highly individual and depends on things like weight and height, your gender, how hot it is outside, how humid it is, how far you're running, your pace, and even the terrain. Is there hills? Is there downhills? So it's super individual. And as you start training, you'll kind of start to see what does and doesn't work. Really, regular hydration is important for everyone, but particularly true for those that are considering a marathon. And it's really staying hydrated all day long. You should be drinking fluids all day. And like I said, it's very individualized. The recommendation is 64 ounces at least. For me, I have found that 90 ounces is my happy place. And some of the ways that you can tell whether you're hydrated, you should be going to the bathroom every 3 to 4 hours. And when you do go to the bathroom, your urine should look very pale yellow. If it's darker or amber, you're not getting enough fluid. If you're 6 to 8 hours going to the bathroom, then you're obviously not getting hydrated. In regards to training, hydration before a run, you really should drink about 12 to 16 ounces about 2 hours prior to any kind of training. And then in regards to hydrating during your run, it's typically generally accepted if the run is less than 60 minutes, you don't have to drink water. But I actually don't buy onto that opinion. Specifically to marathons, only because I just mentioned about how much fluid is lost during the marathon. And so during the marathon, it's super important for you to hydrate all the time. And so I buy into that you should train exactly what is expected on race day. And so my opinion's to hydrate no matter the distance or time. And so ultimately it's, the good rule of thumb is to drink 3 to 4 large sips of fluid every 15 to 20 minutes. And water isn't sufficient. You also need electrolytes, definitely, if your run is going to be longer than 60 minutes. You can do that by including sports drinks. I do half water, half electrolytes is kind of the method that worked well for me. My husband liked to drink only water, and he actually would take electrolyte little capsules. Either way, you need fluid and electrolytes on anything over 60 minutes for sure. And again, I recommend more of the drink 3 to 4 large gulpfuls every 15 to 20 minutes. I did want to mention on race day, there's going to be aid stations along the way that will supply you with water and sports drinks. But when you're training, there's no one there. So you have to kind of determine how to hydrate yourself, especially on your long runs. I recommend purchasing a hydration pack or belt. That's what I had and carried my water and sport drink with me. You can also do a short loop on your long runs and stash water or electrolytes in one specific area so that when you loop, you have your hydration, and then you loop again and you have another one. So that's another option. Some clues that there are issues, you're not hydrating enough, is your digestive tract starts cramping and being upset, and that could indicate that you're not getting enough electrolytes. If you're thirsty, at that point you've lost over 2% of your body's water, and that is where it affects your performance. And so don't wait until you're thirsty. And then the last thing is when you come home from the run, if your urine is darker, after your run, you did not hydrate well during the run. So you're going to have to kind of, it's trial and error, definitely. You also need to commit to nutrition so your body's able to handle the challenges you're giving it. If you don't commit to nutrition, it actually creates, again, a greater risk for injury and compromises your immune system, so you're more at risk for illness. You should really eat, I recommend eating every 2.5 to 3 hours. That helps keep your blood sugar stable and will avoid excessive hunger, because when you're training, you're burning a lot of calories. So it really kind of stabilizes your hunger and your blood sugar. Now, carbohydrates are the fuel that fuels the muscles and provides the energy, and really should make up most of your diet. Specifically, nutritionists recommend that you eat 2.7 to 4.5 grams of carbohydrates per pound of you per day. So, for example, a 135-pound runner would need 365 to 607 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now, I use a tracking system. I have a little watch that kind of tracks my mileage, and I track how much of what I'm eating, and that's how you can really narrow down how much carbohydrates you're eating, how much protein you're eating, and how much fat you're eating, and really narrow that down. But the nutritional advice is very specific for carbohydrates and protein, what your body needs if you're going to be doing this, doing marathons. Protein provides the building blocks that helps your muscles recover. And so you need protein as well, but not as much as the carbohydrates. You need 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per pound of you. So again, that 135-pound runner would need 81 to 106 grams of protein per day. There's no specific recommendation for fat for runners, but just like anyone, you should include healthy fats as part of your runner's diet. Some healthy fat examples would be like nuts and seeds, avocado, or olive or canola oil. How do you fuel before your run? And it's really based on the time before your run. If you have 3 or 4 hours before your run, then eating a kind of a low-fat meal with a good amount of carbohydrates and protein in it would be recommended. But if that, and the reason behind that is it gives you the fuel, but then also allows your stomach to empty before you start your run. But if there isn't enough time to eat 3 or 4 hours, if it's maybe 1 or 2 hours, you can do like a lighter snack, like a piece of fruit, a bowl of cereal, a small bagel, or with some peanut butter would be some examples. And then maybe if it's less than an hour before your run, you can just try to use energy bar or energy gels. So like the example picture on the right-hand side is what's called GU energy gels. It's kind of a good balance of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And it just gives you that boost that you need. And so less than an hour, that's what I would use prior to a run. To recover from your run, it's important to eat within 30 minutes of your training, and you need a combination of carbohydrates and protein. I utilized chocolate milk. That was my favorite, or like a peanut butter sandwich would be great. All right, what kind of items do you need to run a marathon? First and foremost is your shoes. I recommend purchasing from a running store that will assess your gait. If you tend to run with your toes in or your toes out, or maybe you have flat feet or high arches, the store will look at your gait and make recommendations. Now, when I started running, I went to a big box store. I bought a pair of running shoes, and within a couple weeks I was having knee pain. And a friend of mine said, "Where did you get your shoes?" And I told him, and he told me, "Go to a running store." So that's what I did. And they assessed my gait and told me I had really high arches, and gave me a selection of 4 or 5 shoes that I could choose from. And less than a week later, my knee issues were gone. So I definitely think there is some validity to that. You actually should, I recommend considering buying 2 pairs of shoes. And the reason is because you should replace running shoes every 300 to 500 miles. And if you buy 1 pair of shoes, you may end up getting to that 3 pushing to 500 miles right before the marathon. And you never want to start new shoes prior to a marathon. And you wouldn't want to run a marathon with shoes that are older than the 500 miles, or because the cushion is going to diminish and you risk injury. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. Socks, make sure they're lightweight and seamless. Clothing, moisture wicking top. Please avoid cotton, especially for men, because it can chafe. A lot of times women will wear a sports bra, and that's an absolute. And so they don't get as much chafing on the upper portion, but men don't wear the sports bras. And so a lot of times that back and forth from running, the top is going to chafe their nipples in particular, and can cause some discomfort. So definitely avoid the cotton. I highly recommend the spandex on the bottom to avoid chafing, and that includes male and female. I'm not a fan of the running shorts, just because to me, it, at least for me, caused a lot of chafing. And then dress according to the weather conditions. I actually recommend you dressing lighter. So if it's cool outside, still wear shorts and a tank top, because as you run, your body's going to produce heat. And if you are overdressed, it actually leads to dehydration quicker. So that's the reasoning behind that. I already talked about the sports bra. And then again, I definitely recommend, it's optional, but highly recommended, a hydration belt so that you can keep hydrated, a sports watch to monitor your miles and your pace, and a heart rate monitor, which we'll actually talk about in a few minutes. All right, now that we're talked about the basics, we're going to review some important factors that can impact your performance. Depending on your athletic ability, you have to allow your body to adapt to the new demands. Joints and tendons actually take longer than muscles to adapt. And so a lot of times people feel comfortable and feel like they have the energy to go and push it, and then they develop like a tendonitis or shin splints, and it's because the tendons and joints haven't caught up to the muscles. So kind of keep that in mind. Stick to that 10%. Don't increase it. So you shouldn't go run a mile today and in 2 days run 2 miles. That's a 50% increase. So it really should be that gradual adaptation where you're slowly increasing the duration. And then you also add intensity, and you do it at kind of different times to kind of surprise the body. And that will help you continue to improve as well. I highly recommend utilizing a heart rate monitor while training. This kind of helps you not exert too much or too little, and it manages your pace for that endurance event. It helps you endure because it really narrows you down to the zone that allows you to go longer. Okay. Typically, the entire race will be conducted in zone 2. If you really start pushing it and get into like the zone 3 or 4 for your marathon, you are not going to be able to finish. So you figure out your heart rate zones by taking 220 and you subtract your age. So, and then you do the percentages. So an example would be a 35-year-old, 220 minus 35 is 185. So zone 1 is going to be 120 to 138. Zone 2 is going to be 139 to 158, and so on. And you're going to actually train in zone 1, zone 2, and a little bit in zone 3 and 4 to increase. And we'll talk more about that. But again, the actual marathon really should be conducted in that zone 2. Most training plans recommend running at least 3 to 4 days a week, with each run having a specific purpose. And these are the 3 types of different types of runs that you can kind of expect in training programs. The first is a long run. We do this once a week. It's a distance thing. And it really teaches the body muscle endurance. And it also teaches the body to not only burn glucose stores for energy, but also it teaches the body to burn fat stores for energy as well. So this actually should be done in zone 1. So at an easier pace than like a typical, because you're going for a longer duration. The majority of people will overdo long run intensity. You really need to be comfortable. And in that zone 1, you should be able to have a conversation while you're running. You also should kind of test your fluid and fuel intake needs to see what works best for you on these long runs. Another type of running you can expect to do during training is a shorter run. These typically are done about 3 times a week. These are done at that slightly more challenging pace in the zone 2. You then sustain that level. And this actually teaches the body to be more aerobic. It increases the aerobic capacity. And then the final type of runs are speed or high intensity runs. And these are that surprising the body that I mentioned earlier. A couple kinds are what's called a tempo run, that your pace will increase throughout the run, and it's challenging. And then also that interval where you have a short distance that's really high intensity, and then you'll recover and repeat. Ultimately, this higher intensity will make your running feel easier. It improves your pace and improves your strength as well. These are typically done in that zone 3 or 4. It's pushing your body to improve. But again, we don't want to do these too often, 1 to 2 times a week, and only if you really have that solid running foundation. You don't want to go on day 1 and do a high intensity because you're going to injure yourself. The rule of thumb is that you should never do back-to-back long and intensity runs. So on Sunday, you shouldn't do a long run. On Monday, you shouldn't do an intensity run. You really need yourself to give yourself about 2 days to recover from one of those. So typically, they're going to do short with the intensity included in the short, and then a long run at least 2 days separately, if that makes sense, hopefully. All right, what to expect. Give yourself permission to start out slow. Again, don't push it. Your muscles may be ready, but your joints and tendons aren't. There's really nothing worse than hitting it really hard and getting injured, or hitting it hard, think you can, and then you end up not being able to finish. You can expect some muscle soreness. That's very normal. Doing some stretching. We'll talk more about what you can do to kind of reduce that. And then also, don't ever think that you're too slow. Running a marathon is really a solo activity. It should be looked as a challenge for you and you alone. You're really only racing yourself. During an endurance race, the biggest challenge is not necessarily the physical. I mentioned earlier that it's mental. Your mind's going to have that negative talk. And when I didn't feel like going for a run, or if I was in the middle of the run and I got that negative talk in my head about, why are you doing this? You need to stop. A lot of times I would switch it by imagining myself running through the finish line, and that usually would switch it for me. You should also expect that you need to rest. Usually you're going to have at least 2 days a week during training that you should not be running at all, because it's so high impact. Running is so high impact. You need to allow those muscles to recover from those workouts, and that also helps with your mental burnout. The greatest enemy of anyone who's going to run a marathon is injury. And the best way to protect against injury is not only sleep, but rest. So if you want to be active on your rest days, then do something different, like walk or bike or swim or lift weights, just nothing that's as high impact as the running. And then the last final aspect to kind of expect is the tapering period, which actually occurs the last 3 weeks of training. Tapering basically means that you have trained and improved in distance over a period of weeks, and then you get 3 days or 3 weeks before the event, and you'll taper off about 25 to 50% each of the 3 weeks. So if your peak distance was 20 miles, maybe the next week you're going to drop to 18, and then maybe you'll drop to 15, and then maybe you'll drop to 10, or whatever. Different training programs are different. We'll talk more. I highly recommend one particular type of training program, and I'll give that information to you at the end. And the reason we taper is it allows those muscles to really fully recover and repair. It can take up to about a month for muscles that were really pushed to fully repair. And so that's why you're kind of trying to taper down, so that your muscles are at its best on race day. And you're not going to decondition while you're tapering off. You're still running. You're just not pushing the body to do more. Sometimes the tapering really makes people nervous, and they don't think they did enough, and they're tempted and push hard, and that can be definitely detrimental. As with any exercise, it's important before you start for you to stretch, because again, this will help reduce the injury. The old school thought was that you would do stretching. It's called static stretching. So you'd stretch and then hold it. But that actually has been proven that is not the best. The best is actually dynamic stretching before and static stretching after. And it's because of what they do. Dynamic stretching warms the muscles. It gets oxygen to the muscles. It improves the lubrication in the joints. And static stretching stretches and elongates the muscles. And so they're just two different things. So if you're trying to warm the muscle and get it ready for the run, that's why we do the dynamic stretching. So the pictures kind of just showed some examples of different dynamic stretching. So like, for example, the girl on the left, she is doing a squat, and then she comes back up, and then she does a squat, and she does that over and over and over again until, you know, her muscles feel nice and warm, 20, 30 times. You can also do the lunges, the leg swings, butt kicks, where you put your knees really high, or you're hugging your knees. So those are just some examples. Again, you're constantly moving. You don't want to stretch statically before a run. Couple things that can make running easier. One is chai running, and the other one is rhythmic breathing. Chai running is where you take, instead of long strides, you take shorter strides, which means that you have a quicker turnover of your legs. The goal would be about 180 steps per minute. You end up taking more steps, but the steps take less effort. And I recommend that you do this on a beat. So if you do a Google search, you look on Spotify or Amazon Music for music that has like a beat of 165 beats per minute, and then you can slowly move up to 180. One of the tips with music, if you like to listen to music while you run, is that instead of having your foot hit on the beat, is that you lift your back leg on the beat. That actually helps create like a forward momentum rather than a braking. The other thing is rhythmic breathing. The rhythmic breathing basically means running with a breathing pattern. So like 3 breaths in and 1 breath out, or 2 breaths in and 1 breath out. This is kind of what I did. It helped me take my mind off of the impact of the running and the difficulty of the running, and just focus on my breathing. So I would breathe in through my nose and then out through my mouth. So and that's how I ran the whole time. And I almost like got into a rhythm. That's how I kind of got into running. And it totally takes the world away when you do that. So I definitely recommend that. All right, and then cool down. This is your static stretching, where you stretch and hold for 30 seconds. You definitely want to breathe, because the whole purpose is not only to lengthen the muscle, get rid of the carbon dioxide that has built up, but also pour oxygen into the muscle. And it can't do that if you're holding your breath. Just some examples. You really need to do the back of your legs, your quads, front of your legs, and your calves are the muscles you should really focus in when you're doing your stretching. Some additional things that you can do to help not be so sore. You can try compression stocks, Epsom salt baths, or warm soaks. And they have like these little self massagers that you can use that will help. But the stretching, again, will reduce soreness and muscle fatigue as well. Missing 1 or 2 workouts due to an illness is not significant in the whole picture if you're training for 18 weeks. But really, consistency is the most important thing when training for a marathon. In fact, if your body feels particularly tired one day, you need to heed its call and skip one of your sessions that week, perhaps. But you also have to differentiate between, is this my body talking or is this my mind talking? Because if it's your mind, go ahead and do it. If it's your body, then you need to listen to your body. If you miss more than a week of training, you're not going to be able to maintain your current fitness level. Just in 1 week, you can become deconditioned and your body just can't jump back into the same level that you were doing before. So if you do miss 7 days or more, don't get back into training too quickly. You need to, again, give those muscles and or those tendons and muscles and joints and everything time to adapt to the demands. So you can do the run walk method. You can slowly build up back up, but again, no more than the 10%. All right, we're getting close to the end. Race day. The days before the race, make sure that you don't blow it. Really, you want to prioritize sleep. Get instead of 7 to 8 hours, maybe shoot for 9 hours so that you're getting more sleep on that. You're really recovering. Hydrate well. Make sure that you have good nutrition. A lot of people have heard about this carb loading before a race. Loading with carbohydrates in the days leading up to an endurance event may boost your muscle energy reserves, but it's also not a license to kill. It's easy to overconsume in the name of carb loading. A true carb load starts about 6 days out from an endurance event. And as you taper runs, you actually gradually increase your intake of carbohydrates, which kind of means like 2 servings, extra servings of carbohydrates daily. Make sure you pick up your race packet if they offer it the day before. That's the best thing, because then you avoid having to do that the day of and increasing your anxiety. That's also a good time to ask if to check ahead if you like to run with music, because some marathons will not allow that on the course. If there's a race expo, don't spend a lot of hours on your feet. It's best to save your legs and feet for the next day. And it's a great idea to plan every detail of race day, from waking up, dressing, getting out the door, getting to the starting line. If you have friends or family coming to cheer you on, look at the map, plan ahead where they're going to be and where they're going to meet you. A friend along the way is a great morale boost, and they can also carry a bag that maybe has some extra essentials, like an extra pair of socks, or shoelaces, or extra nutrition that you may need. And then lay out the clothing that you're going to wear. Do not, just like shoes, we don't want you to wear new shoes to a marathon. We don't want you to wear a new outfit to a marathon either. You want to know if it's going to chafe you, and if so, where. And then be prepared for anything. You fill that bag with essentials, and just in cases. On race day, make sure, just like you have been doing all along with your training, eat a simple high carbohydrate breakfast with a little bit of protein 3 to 4 hours before the race. Use Vaseline or another lubrication to apply to those areas that may chafe. No matter what the temperature is when you get up, typically it's going to be cold. And so a lot of people will put on clothing that they can just discard and not care if they lose it along the way, because as you run, you're going to get warmer. Pin on your number. Plan on arriving at least an hour before the race, so you have time to warm up and go to the bathroom. The bathroom line is going to be very long, and that's okay. So just shoot for being there 30 to 40 minutes before the official time. Then once you've gone to the bathroom, warm up with a little brisk walk and a light jog. Do your stretches, your dynamic stretches. Head to the start and find a spot. Definitely you're ready to go as soon as you find a spot. During the race, make sure that you start slowly. It's really easy to get caught up in race day adrenaline. But starting too fast is a rookie mistake. When you start out too fast and start trying to compete with the people around you, you're going to wear out quickly and struggle to complete the race. So stick with the pace that you've been used to running, okay? Listen to your body. A lot of runners, if at mile 20, they feel really good, they'll pick up the pace at that point. It's important not to run through the aid stations. Hydrate, use your hydration plan, and then enjoy the energy of the spectators. It's one of the best things about endurance races. They're going to really kind of keep you going. But really, even if the weather's perfect, you're well trained, you've done your fuel, you're rested, your hydration, sometimes you're not always up to running that 26.2 miles. So there is no shame in walking or taking a break. Listen to your body, and don't beat yourself up for taking a break or walking a portion of it. After the race, no matter what happened, be proud of yourself. Again, you're going to always finish a marathon dehydrated. Make sure you're hydrating well. I avoid alcohol and or use it sparingly, because it actually interferes with your rehydration. It can take about 24 hours to rehydrate. Make sure you replenish your carbohydrates just like you have all along. You need carbohydrate and protein within 30 minutes of the finishing. Most events will have complimentary fruit and protein available to you. Make sure you get some photos with your medal, your fans, friends or family, and be proud of yourself. It's always a good idea to kind of keep moving and walking for 30 to 60 minutes following the race. That will really help with the post-race stiffness, and stretch like you always have. Some runners will get inflammation in their legs, and you can help with that by elevating your legs by soaking them in cold water, or wearing compression stockings. And then for the next couple days, make sure that you actually get extra sleep and eat extra well, because after a marathon, you are at higher risk. You've really taxed your immune system, and that's when people will get sick. So really key in on that. And then make sure that you kind of avoid pushing your body for that month afterwards, because your body's truly taking that long to recover. All right, finally, some tips and resources. Some top tips: race with a friend to keep your motivation up. Finding a partner or a group who can also prepare for a marathon or wants to do a marathon really can provide that best support and structure and motivation. Studies really show that people who have never run a race prior to a marathon are at greater risk for injury. So don't have your half marathon or a marathon be your first race. Try a dress rehearsal, 5K or 10K. I definitely recommend driving the course ahead of time if you can. Alternatively, you can use the race course map to help you kind of plan. If you've got lots of hills, then you should be training with hills. If there's a huge hill at mile 20, practice your hill training after you do your long run. If the course is flat, train on flat terrain. So really, the more you match your race course in training, the better you're going to do on race day. And then use your own fuel for race day. If you end up finding that fuel, those quick energy goos that you like, take your own supply, because many times the aid stations will maybe supply a different kind, and you never want to try something you've never tried before because it can create some digestive issues. So many of the races will detail what they're going to be supplying. So if it's something that you're already using, then you're golden. But if not, take your own supply. And then finally, if you're feeling good, speed up for the last mile. There's nothing better than finishing strong. All right, I mentioned I was going to give you some resources. New York Roadrunners is a great resource. It's got articles to help you get started. And halhigdon.com is where I want you to go to get your training program. Now, there's lots of books that you can buy. There's lots of information, but at least on Hal Higdon, has some really great training programs. It's specific to where you are right now, and they're free. So that's always a positive. Hal Higdon is actually a famous Olympic and marathon runner. He's written over 36 books, and you go to the halhigdon.com, you click on training program at the top, and then select, are you doing a half? Are you doing a marathon? Are you active? Are you not active? So it's got a bunch of them that you can just print for free. In regards to apps, you can use Map My Run and Strava. That kind of helps you track your mileage by GPS. And then if you're looking for an event, Running in the USA can help you find events and also find a club to join. And active.com will help you find and directly sign up for running events using their website. And there's my references, and I'm happy to take questions for the last 5 minutes.
Sadie, can you see the questions? Sadie, can you see the questions? Okay, I'll ask them. We have one that says, it's actually a statement. She says, I find stadium stairs helps build her stamina.
Great. Yeah. And that's, again, increasing your intensity. And that is kind of like hill training, like running up a hill.
Okay. Is it better to train or run with a partner or on your own? You just answered that a minute ago. What if your skills and experience don't match?
Say that again.
If,
with running with a person?
and your levels of running are different.
Yeah. So I actually experienced that. Me and my husband ran together, and he's a male. He's faster than me. And so even though we maybe were not running together, we were running the same course and we would pass each other, or he was still there for support. Does that make sense? And he was still there for motivation because we would leave and walk out the door at the same time. And he was still there to help answer questions or what have you. So even if you're not the exact pace, you still can do it together in some sense. You just may not be running right by each other at the same time.
Right. That's actually how my husband and I used to take hikes. He was a fast one. I was slow, but I could always beat him because he'd stop more often than I would. So it always worked out. Another question, how long does it usually take to go to a baseline to start a training program?
So again, it depends on how active you are right now. And that's where I kind of said, if you are not active at all, there's a lot of what they call couch to 5K or couch to 10K programs. And so that's what I would recommend. If you're going to do a half marathon, I would do the couch to 5K plan. If you're, and you've never been active, that base would, and you want to do a full marathon, then I would do the couch to 10K to get to that level where you can then officially start that marathon training. But maybe you're kind of halfway in between. And so you kind of have to gauge where you are. But the key is being able to run 2 to 3 miles at a time if you're going to do a half marathon and not have a problem with that. 4 days a week. And the same would be true of the full marathon. You have to be able to run 5 to 6 miles prior to 4 days a week prior to beginning your training.
Great, thank you. Besides good shoes, is there anything else that can help with any kind of knee problems? I've heard back and forth that running helps promote knee problems, and then I've heard that it doesn't.
So running is hard on the knees. It's probably the hardest on the knees. One of the things you can do to have it not be so difficult on the knees is not to propel yourself into the air too much. Sometimes you'll see people like really jump really far. That actually makes the impact as you come back down onto the road really harsh. And so quicker paces, not pushing yourself forward instead of pushing yourself up will help. But it can be hard on the knees. But if your foot is landing on the middle of your foot instead of on your toe or on your heel, and your toes aren't pointed in, your toes aren't pointed out, that really helps. So it's kind of a technical portion as well. If you're having knee pain, you need to find the solution. I wouldn't keep running. Some people that have had knee problems still can successfully run if they've got really great technique. But sometimes I've seen like people like tape, use different types of tape or braces to help. And I would say that's probably fine unless you're having pain. If you're running with pain, it's detrimental and I wouldn't recommend it.
Great, thank you, Laura. It is a little after 1 o'clock, so I'm going to call time right now, but thank you. I'm always amazed. I'm not a marathon runner, but I'm always amazed at how much information I learn. Thank you so much for your time, and
Okay.
we will all talk soon. Thank you, everybody.